Hi, my name is Scott, and I've been airbrushing miniatures for over a decade. And today I'm joined by Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan, and I have owned an airbrush for probably about as long and not really used it.
For me, the road to learning how to airbrush was pretty challenging. A lot didn't make sense until a few things clicked into place. And today I'm going to share those pieces of advice with you and also Dan so you can go from clueless to competent. Here's how today's video is going to go. First, I'm going to give Dan some basic airbrushing advice, and we'll employ those techniques on a mini he brought today. With a basic framework of skills, we'll go a little deeper so that Dan isn't simply using an airbrush for priming and base coating, but also getting buttery smooth blends, which is what we all want with our airbrush. Throughout the whole video, I'll answer any questions that Dan has so you get his beginner perspective with my expert knowledge. Let's get started. I think the first thing that a beginner should understand, especially with a tool that's a little bit more complicated than just a normal paintbrush, is how it works and how it comes apart and goes back together. So here I have an exploded view of the brush that we're using today in a Wada HPCS or an Wada Eclipse. Basically, most airbrushes you'll find in our hobby are gravity-fed airbrushes, which very simply means that gravity feeds paint down into this little vessel that then gets atomized when it blows out the front. The things that are most likely to break and give you problems are the needle itself. It's going to bend at the tip and stuff like that. And also this guy as well. That little hole right there is very specific, and it might crunch and get smaller, or stuff might get gunked up in there. You're very often going to be fixing these two things, and that'll solve probably the majority of the issues you experience with airbrushes clogging and stuff like that. Now, I think it's important for us to put this back together. I'm going to have you do that.
Oh, geez.
Despite using an Eclipse in this video, the components you see here are very similar to a lot of airbrush manufacturers you'll see in the hobby, from Badger and from Harder and Steenbeck. So hopefully this assembly guide is useful for those owners as well. I could start in the front assembly here, and I like to do something that maybe some people don't do, and that is put a little beeswax on these threads here. I find that if you can really ensure that no leaks are happening in this front assembly part, the airbrush tends to function more normally, like you would expect it to. There is an O-ring on the front here to help with making sure you get a good seal, but I find that it can't hurt to have just a little bit of extra insurance. Before we put that component on, however, we need to put in the little needle nozzle. This thing kind of just sits in here awkwardly, and then it gets held in place by this component. And this component here is important to create a airtight seal for the airbrush to do the thing that it does, atomize paint. And so if you're having some problems with paint atomization, maybe check on that seal. Maybe you lost it. Maybe it got a little dry and torn. Just put in some beeswax or get a new O-ring. Either one will work. Every Iwata airbrush comes with a wrench that fits the head right here. You do not need to crank this down super tightly, just enough to create an airtight seal. Give it a little spin and should be good to go. There are holes in this front assembly here, and so I assume that this part also matters for having a nice airtight seal. And so I also put a little bit of beeswax on here. I might have had an O-ring at some point that I lost because I take my airbrush apart a lot. I can't remember, but it doesn't hurt, so I just tend to put it on. Iwata also makes a set of nylon pliers that helps to tighten down this particular component. It has a cutout that matches the diameter of this particular part. And this part does get stuck a little bit when you are taking it apart. Again, it doesn't need to be that tight, just a little bit tight. And this will help to take it off when it does get stuck without damaging the threads. I have used vice grips in the past, but that does kind of mangle the front of the airbrush a little bit. And lastly, we will put on the needle tip protector. All right, cool. Got the front assembly all done. Now we'll start to focus on the back here. I will put in this particular component. This holds the needle straight. This particular tab forces itself against the trigger, which then eventually helps to give it some tension on the trigger so you can pull back on it. And then, without anything forcing this thing in yet, I will take my needle and drop it down so the post lands right in that hole. When you push up and down in the needle, it is pushing a valve in there open and close. You want to make sure that the hole is facing in line with the body of the airbrush, eventually the needle is going to travel through that hole. And so if you put it in the wrong way, the needle will get blocked by your trigger. Okay, do a little test. All right, we got some pressure there. Everything's loose now though. Next up is the spring that actually provides the tension against the trigger. And then this particular thing that holds the spring captive, and then we can give the trigger a test. This will kind of bottom out, letting you know when it's done screwing. All right, cool. The trigger is still kind of loose in there, so don't yank it upright, but we can push it down. It gets pulled back nicely. There's no resistance. Everything feels good. And then with everything put together, the second to last thing we'll do is thread the needle. And you obviously just want to be very careful. Just get it started. Actually, before you get it started, I'll make it even simpler. Let's put a little bit of needle juice on here. This is just some oil. It'll help it lubricate into the airbrush. It'll help paint not stick to it, a little bit. I don't know how much that actually works. Mostly just make sure that things don't stick. And when you're pushing the needle in, be mindful of it getting stuck somewhere. You do need to push pretty hard, but if it's getting stuck, don't force it. Yeah, there's a little bit of pressure when you push it in.
Hit that point, kind of.
Yes, because there's this little thing right in the middle here. It's called this needle packing set. That's what ensures that no liquid gets back inside the body here. There's a little Teflon seal on it. It kind of like clamps down on the needle a little bit, so it's a little bit hard to push through that middle part.
Is that something that can wear, or is that like a, just something that goes over time?
Yeah, I've had to replace that every now and then. Also, if you ever have an issue with paint getting back in that compartment, or if you feel like it's too tight, loosening that thing right there will help a lot. But it's like a quarter turn or a 10-degree turn, either forward or backwards. So, okay, the last thing that we're gonna do in setting up our airbrush for use is do a little bit of Teflon tape. Every metal to metal connection is an opportunity for air to escape. And it's a lot nicer when everything is airtight. Your compressor doesn't kick on as often. You get more consistent results. A lot of compressors come with this. This is called Teflon tape or plumber's tape, either one. You want to just essentially wrap your threads in it. You want to make sure when you're spinning this that you're also tightening the Teflon tape and not loosening it. Now that our airbrush is fully assembled, I want to let you know about another fully assembled tool, and that's Brevo, this video's sponsor. Brevo is an all-in-one marketing and sales platform designed to help businesses grow through smarter customer relationships. It combines email marketing, SMS, chat, CRM, and marketing automation in one affordable tool, making it perfect for businesses that want powerful features without enterprise-level complexity or pricing. If you're looking to launch a crowdfunding campaign and you're new to marketing, Brevo seems like a great place for a beginner to start with a generous contact limit of 100,000 people and 300 emails a day and built-in SMS and CRM functionality in their free plan. The free plan is fully loaded. Personally, having done email marketing before in the past with my Kickstarter campaign, one feature of Brevo that has me excited is the fact that the pricing isn't based on the number of contacts like a lot of other similar tools, but rather how many emails you send. That's a lot more straightforward than getting charged for every contact in my mailing list, even ones who are unsubscribed. MailChimp. Brevo is truly an all-in-one service, enabling you as someone trying to get a business off the ground with valuable time-saving tools all under one hood. With my code that you can see on the screen right now, you can save 50% on their starter and standard plans for the first 3 months if you're a new customer. Check out Brevo at the link in my description. All right, let's get on with some more airbrushing. All right, now we're gonna get on to doing some actual painting, which is some priming. In order to push paint through the airbrush that is thick, has a high viscosity, you need a higher pressure. And so primer is probably some of the thickest stuff you'll end up putting through the airbrush. And so in order to do that, we're gonna do it on a little bit of a higher pressure. We're gonna float kind of in the 20, 25 PSI range for that. The other thing that's very important before you put any paint in your airbrush is just to make sure that it works. Because it's very sad to get your paint all nice and ready and then discover that it is clogged. Now that we know that our airbrushes are actually functioning, funny story, mine wasn't. I actually broke it seconds before we started, but now that it is functioning, we can put some primer in. There's a lot of issues with airbrushes clogging and stuff like that.
And when I started using strainers for my airbrush, I solved all of those problems. There are a few other best practices that I'll tell you guys and Dan about later, but step one, just use a strainer, especially for things like that are goopy like primer. I'll leave a link down in the description in case you want to figure out which ones that I'm using.
Is it just some of that is potentially just like curing into little chunks or like bonding to itself?
Yeah, I find that especially just like older primer like this stuff is, like you just mentioned, has some cured bits inside of it.
Okay.
And you never can really see it come out in the paint until it's too late. So a strainer to catch it is a good idea. So like I mentioned earlier, viscosity of the paint you want to use is directly related to how much pressure you want to use with the airbrush. So let's just start with one of these little tester pieces that I have off to the side here, and I want to show you what it looks like when you don't have the right pressure. It's coming out super speckly, which you might notice if you use thick paint and low PSI, that happens pretty often. But if you turn the pressure up, you can solve that problem.
Is it just the higher pressure helps the paint atomize better? Or?
Yeah, exactly. Now let's go on to priming the model. When I prime a model, I like to focus on the areas that are hard to see first. And so I'll like shoot from below, I'll shoot into cracks, I'll shoot under capes and under things like that, because those are the things that tend to be hard to see once the model is mostly black. So just start on the underside first, and then once you sorted all that stuff, then do the easy to see stuff.
And are you pulling the plunger back most of the way or just a little bit each time?
I am never pulling this trigger back the entire way.
Okay.
What I'm trying to do is actually probably like a 70-30 split of air and paint. And so I apply a little bit of paint, and then I do some air, which like sets that paint and dries it, and then I start to do some more paint. So one thing I want to help you with, Dan, is obviously the airbrush shoots out a cone of paint, right?
Yeah.
So the further away you are from the model, the wider that fan is going to be.
Should I be getting closer?
So I think you can get a little bit further away, actually. If you stay further away, your area of effect is going to be larger. You'll cover more of the model quickly.
As I say, you were doing that so much quicker than I was.
Yeah. You also, maybe you can experiment with being a little bit more aggressive with the paint too. But this seems like that helped a lot. Like you're going way faster now.
Yeah.
All right, so now we can clean out the airbrush now that our priming is done. I like to not shoot the rest of this material through the airbrush, like into a thing like this.
Yeah.
And instead, I like to take a little spray bottle here and kind of just spray it all out and like get really deep down in there and get as much primer out as I possibly can. Okay, and then with that done, the next thing we'll do, we'll just put a little bit of ISO in the cup as well. I like to actually pull on this needle chucking nut right here, which moves the needle in and out of the cup, which loosens any paint that might be around that area. And then I'll spray it into something like this to get rid of the rest of it. And I'll do that a few times. And the last thing I do is I just check the end of the needle to see if I have any buildup on the needle. In my case, I don't, but very often after priming, especially for a long time, you will. But if you do have any buildup, just taking a little brush and kind of brushing it off will get rid of all of it. People have a lot of questions about like, how thoroughly do you clean your brush in between colors and stuff like that. And it depends what paint you're using and what paint you're going to. In the case of I have a primer and I'm going into a color, I want to pretty thoroughly clean out my airbrush. And so I'll do something like you just saw. If I'm going from say a blue to a lighter blue, I probably won't be as thorough when I'm doing my cleaning. So I don't really care if those two colors mix that much. Also, I want to mention something about ventilation and also gloves and stuff like that. Dan and I are not using ventilation right now because it makes it harder to record the video because you can't hear our voices as well. Airbrushing water-based acrylics like we are in this video is the kind of thing that's not going to kill you if you do it like one time without ventilation. But over the course of an entire life of like hobbying, like it's not a good thing to breathe in atomized paint. So if you're airbrushing, you should just always use some kind of mask like this, buy replacement filters for them, and you can replace them say once every 6 months or however often you do airbrushing, whatever makes sense for you. We are airbrushing onto our desks here, and on the desks we're going to shoot into some paper towel, and the paper towel will catch a lot of the paint that goes straight into our desk. So that'll help. Both those things will help a lot if you don't have like proper ventilation. Some kind of material on your desk to absorb a lot of the paint, and also a mask. Now we're going to get into actually doing some painting. And another great way to ensure you don't clog your airbrush is to mix and thin paint in a separate vessel that's not the cup of the airbrush. For like many years, I would mix paint directly into the airbrush cup because I'm lazy and I wanted to go fast. But I gotta believe that caused so many problems just because of like who knows what is inside of this paintbrush, you know? Like any tiny little thing is gonna mess up the very delicate geometry of this tool. So let's mix outside of the cup. We're gonna be using AK Interactive today, a non-airbrushing paint, just to show you what thinning it looks like. Also, I'm choosing it because it's a matte paint, and I find that a matte paint is easier to airbrush with, at least for base coating and stuff, because paint tends to grip much better to matte paint than it does glossy paint. If you airbrush on top of glossy paint, you might notice the paint has a tendency to kind of run away really easily, and if it's matte, it sticks down better. All right, so when it comes to thinning airbrush paint, it's much like thinning paint for a paintbrush. There is no one way to do it. There is no formula you can use to get the best thinned paint. It is definitely an eyeball thing. However, it depends on what you're doing. We're going to be base coating, right?
Yeah.
And so we care about opacity. We want the paint that goes down to be opaque sooner rather than later because you don't want to spend a bunch of time spraying a bunch of layers. And so because of that, we can loosen or thin our paint so it's a little bit thicker, you know, on the thicker side. I want just to kind of run, you know, I don't need it to be super thin. And this kind of feels a little bit thick still, and I'm able to determine that just because of some experience. And also I can see how the paint is moving in the container, and it feels just a little bit too thick still. I would say for base coating, if you're not used to doing this, probably use less thinner than you think, because you don't really care about it speckling, being too thick and stuff like that. You really just want opacity. All right, and then same as the primer, we're going to pour our paint through these little filters just so we avoid any little chunkies. All right, earlier I said that we were shooting for 70% air and 30% paint. Now it's probably gonna be more like 90% air and 10% paint. So we're applying more air to help with the drying and less paint. So just going a little bit slower. In the beginning, we talked about thickness. Thickness determines your pressure. And the next part is distance. How accurate the airbrush can be is determined about how close or far away it is from the thing you are painting. If you want more accuracy, you get closer. If you want less, you go further away. For this model we're painting right here, we're gonna work on his like shawl thing on his shoulders. And it's not necessary because it's the first part of the model we're painting, but just for the sake of experimentation, I want you to just try to paint the thing on his shoulders. Try to avoid other parts of the model if possible. And so one thing I want you to think about when doing that is to think about like the beam of the airbrush. If I airbrush him like this, the rest of the paint is going to get on his lower half. But if I turn it like this, now the overspray is going into the desk, right? It's not going onto more of the model. So think about how you're holding the model and like how that beam of the airbrush actually is pointed to avoid getting overspray on parts you don't want to. You can also practice with your little thing. And I think the pressure is a little bit too high.
I was gonna say, I just experienced it just kind of pushing away a little bit.
Yes, that's called spider webbing. We want to avoid that if possible. So we're gonna drop our pressure a little bit, and we can do that because our paint is thinner now. It's thinner than when it was primer.
Speckling a little bit.
Is it coming out kind of splattery?
Yeah.
Can I try it for a second?
Yeah.
I'm actually noticing something maybe a little bit strange. So what you were experiencing is caused by some buildup on the tip of your needle right there. So we'll just brush that away. It's like really loosely like hanging on the needle. And now we'll get much more consistent results. Yeah, the downside of using matte paint is that I found that it unfortunately causes dry tip to occur more frequently. But I think for your base coat, it's worth it to work with a dry paint just to help with future layers sticking down better. While Dan's working on his Mini, I want to answer some questions from you guys. And one of those is, when is it appropriate to use airbrush thinner versus water versus flow improver? What are the benefits of each? I would say you're probably never going to use water to thin your paint. You're always going to want to use some kind of airbrush thinner. The difference between thinner and flow improver is that Thinner is likely a combination of flow improver, some kind of solvent, and maybe a few other ingredients, whereas flow improver is probably just flow improver. As for when to use one over the other, I tend to just use a pre-made acrylic thinner. I don't think about the brand. I just pull one off my shelf and use it. And as far as I can tell, one's from Scale 75, one's from Vallejo, one's from Army Painter. They all just tend to act the exact same. So I would say don't bother trying to make your own airbrush thinner. Just buy one off the shelf. When I went from using just like water and isopropyl to using an actual thinner, it made a huge difference. Now we're gonna get on to adding our first highlight on this guy's shawl. And I'm gonna do that by taking our same blue paint here and mixing in some ink. Ink has a tendency to dry a little glossy and maybe be a little bit too thin, but when mixed in as a highlight, I think it has really nice properties for an airbrush. High flow, it almost acts a little bit like a thinner, so it's not diluting the paint too much in terms of its color and stuff like that. And just like with a paintbrush, the more aggressive you make the jump from one layer to the next, the harder it will be to try to hide that blend. So you want to kind of pick somewhere conservative.
Yeah.
This is way too thick for doing highlighting. Generally speaking, as we go from priming to our final layers with an airbrush, we're going to get thinner and thinner and thinner with the paint. Also, in general, when you go from priming to base coating to highlighting, you need less and less paint. So don't be a sucker like me and mix a ton of paint like I just did. In the priming step, we figured out that the viscosity of the paint is related to how much pressure we need, right? More thickness means more pressure. In the base coating step, we figured out that if I want to get a little bit more accuracy, I have to move further or closer away to the model, depending on what I'm trying to do. Now, what if I want accuracy, but I also don't want to get paint everywhere else? Then we have to put all of those things together. Well, we want our brush to be close to the model. But as you discovered when your airbrush got closer to your little test piece, you cause splattering, right? Mm-hmm. And so in order to deal with that splattering, we are going to turn the pressure down. Less air pressure coming out means that we're going to cause spiderwebbing to occur less. Now the problem with using a lower pressure means that we can't use thick paint. It'll be speckly. So in order to get accuracy, we need to use a thin paint and a low pressure. Does that make sense how that relationship ends out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're getting kind of those thinner layers, but when you're getting those thinner layers, it's not pushing it everywhere because the high pressure is just going to want to
blast it. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll grab our test piece here. Try to shoot directly in the middle with the smallest dot you can.
Yep. I definitely just got a whole bunch of spider webbing.
Did you?
Yep.
All right. If you are trying to be accurate with your airbrush and you get a bunch of spider webbing, consider turning your pressure down. If you want to drop it down, just go counterclockwise and do it while you're applying air pressure, because that will show you what the pressure is while you're airbrushing. You see how it kind of goes up when you're not airbrushing? So you want to adjust the pressure for when you're actually applying paint. If while Dan and I are airbrushing, we notice we're getting an unsatisfactory amount of speckling, then I'll just put thinner right into this cup. There's no pigment, no chunks in it, to thin it a little bit. To allow for a smoother application. And that's really what trying to find the right dilution for an airbrush often ends up looking like. Am I getting speckling? Do I want to be on low pressure and be close to the model? Well, then I want to thin my paint a little bit more. It really is a decision matrix you have to go through depending on what you're doing. So now, Dan, we're going to focus our highlights on the upper shoulders of our model here. I want you to point the airbrush right where you want the highlight to be. So we're building it up on his shoulders. And I want you just to, like, seriously just pulse it. Just point and do little pulls on the trigger and just keep building and building that highlight right on his shoulder. And don't move the airbrush anywhere. If you want a bigger highlight, just pull back on the trigger a smidge more. You want to do little pulses, okay? Remember, you want to dry that paint with the airbrush to avoid any kind of spider webbing to occur. The more I spray in the same area, the larger that circle kind of keeps getting over and over and over again. If you let the trigger run for a while, that's going to increase the odds that you get spider webbing.
Oh.
See how that circle is getting bigger and bigger and bigger?
Yeah.
That's what I want you to do to his shoulder. Yeah, let's take a look here. I'm seeing wet paint where I want to see it, but I'm also seeing a little bit of paint kind of
Like underneath there.
yeah, got underneath there, or it's kind of maybe building up a little bit too much there. Like I know there's sculpted detail that runs vertically here, and I'm seeing, if I look at it, I'm seeing some lumps right there and right there. So what that means is maybe you're lingering in one spot,
A little bit too much.
blowing the air, like the paint for too long. You can stay in the same spot, but you want to do like little pulses to really kind of like build up that highlight slowly. Okay. For our last highlight, at least for now, who knows, maybe we'll want to do more highlight. We'll just do straight ink. So I'm going to use a little bit of the cerulean blue ink and a little bit of white ink to get our highlight. And even though this is just straight up ink, I will still be thinning it a little bit. It's still a little too thick right out of the bottle to do delicate highlights right at the end. I want a little bit thinner of a paint, which again, enables me to turn the pressure down, which then allows me to get closer to the model when I'm doing detailed stuff like highlighting. Because ink has a tendency to be quite glossy, I'm going to mix in a little bit of matte varnish just to make it a little bit more matte. You could also use matte medium, just so that when it goes on the model, it sticks down a little bit more. The unfortunate part of using matte paint is that it tends to show off speckling a little bit more than its satin counterparts. But we can just solve that if you, at the end, by just like say, varnishing it with a satin varnish or something like that. For now, we want to make the application of the airbrush easier, and then we can solve any issues with finish later on if we need to. So now, even more so than before, you're going to point the airbrush at a little spot, and you're just going to pulse until that little spot gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm kind of noticing maybe a little bit too much speckling for my wants and needs. And so what I'm going to do, like I mentioned earlier, is I'm going to just put a drop or two of thinner right in here, and then I'm going to cover the front of the little needle protector. I'm going to do some back blow mixing just to mix that thinner into the paint and hopefully make it less speckly. And then also, whenever you do any kind of back blow mixing, whether it's with paint or thinner, there's a lot of paint that's still in here that's unthinned. So just like blow out the excess until you get to that thin stuff and then start using it.
So for the back blow, you just...
Yep. And then pull back a little slowly. Yeah, careful.
Always the important part.
Yeah. Again, I'm trying to hit those upper shoulders and nowhere else. So I get a nice blend from that original dark blue up to that lighter blue of the shoulders.
I feel like I'm still struggling to figure out exactly where I'm aiming, because I definitely, again, had a little bit more hit that back part.
Part of the problem is that I see you airbrushing the model like this. So you have the airbrush pointed kind of at the back of him, and we're kind of trying to emulate what light is doing. What I want to see you do is point it straight down at his shoulder and just pulse it and kind of make that highlight a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger.
I think I might have put too much thinner in there too, because now that's
Yeah,
super liquid.
I'm seeing it run around a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now what I would do is I would just take a moment and dry it with the air, or if you want something more aggressive to speed it up, you can use a hair dryer. Why don't you do a little reset?
And then if there is stuff like, if it's too much thinner in there, is there anything you can do to really fix that?
Got to add more
Just
paint.
add more paint?
Yeah. Can I help you with how you're holding the airbrush?
Sure.
There's a lot of dead space in between your finger and here, and I can see the airbrush moving when you're holding it down. If you like grip it more where this part is touching your hand right here, this knuckle is holding right there, you'll have a much more stable grip so that you can not cause the tip to move like whenever you're pulling the trigger down. All right, now that we've done 2 layers of highlights, we're gonna go back to do some shading. I tend to like to do shading after highlighting because highlights have a tendency to kind of get everywhere. And it's nice to kind of like hem in the highlights with a little bit of shadow. So I do shadows at the end. Same drill, we're gonna mix in some thinner, pour it through a strainer, and then try to target very specific spots on the model to add some shading. We're gonna focus our shading efforts right around here on this lower part of the shawl, and also in the front, right there and right there. Much like with the shoulders, we're gonna point the airbrush at one spot and we're gonna nail it, and then we're gonna just kind of make it grow. You know, pull a little bit further back, and make that circle grow bigger and bigger and bigger until it's like somewhere like maybe like a third of the way up the shoulder.
That got a little bit funky, a little bit too much.
Let me see.
Right at the end there.
I'm noticing that sometimes maybe you go a little too far on one of your last pulses. So maybe just stop short. Just like with painting with a normal brush, the airbrush can also be back and forth. You know, you can apply a little highlight, apply a little shadow, and kind of go back and forth until you get the thing you want. And the better you get at airbrushing, the less you'll have to do those correctional steps. But let's do that correctional step. So you blasted a little bit too much on one side and kind of lost some of the highlight. So let's go back with some more highlight and fix that part. All right, the last thing we're gonna do is really pump up these highlights with a really, really small translucent white highlight. We're gonna thin this white paint out a lot so that when it applies just like kind of like a half opaque layer. So you can still see some of that blue underneath it, but it's gonna give us some more contrast in the shoulder. And I want you to be as accurate and as small as you possibly can be. So before we do it on the model, I really want you to try to build up a small, tiny highlight right in the center of your test piece. And I'm gonna watch you do it. Okay. Okay, you're causing spiderwebbing right now.
Yeah.
Watch on my camera. Let's see if watching me do it makes more sense. Okay, I can see it start to develop, okay? Yeah. So I know where I'm aiming and I know how much to pull back like in muscle memory. And now I'm gonna pull back like 1% more and just kind of like build up a tiny little dot right there, you know? It's like you're pulling back such a small amount, you know? Really, really tiny. So try that out now. In a different spot.
Something like that spot there.
Yeah, it's way better. Yeah, I don't see any tide marks from it blowing away. And so now you're gonna do that on his shoulder. You're gonna aim right at his shoulder and do it like probably like right closer to the neck.
There,
Let's take a look.
right there. Ignoring where I just straight up went on the color,
Hey,
but
that looks
yeah,
really freaking good. Okay,
pretty pleased with that.
now we're cleaning our airbrush out because it's the end of the day. We're done airbrushing now. We're gonna do other things. I'm going to clean out my airbrush in the exact same way that I've been doing it all along here. I'm using a spray bottle to spray out the majority of the paint left in the cup. I'm doing a little bit of ISO. I'm doing a little bit of pulling on the needle to loosen some of that paint that is stuck behind the needle. I'm blowing out some ISO. I'm doing that in rounds and rounds. But then what I'm also gonna do at the very end is pull the whole needle out and clean the entire needle off. Because oftentimes paint will like build up on it, like where it's entering the cup and where it's going into the needle nozzle and stuff like that. And you want to just clean those dry crusties off.
Do you have to be careful how abrasive of a surface you use for this kind of stuff, or?
I am okay using Scotch-Brite. I wouldn't use anything rougher than that. The last thing that is a good idea to do is to clean out the inside of your cup. This is where a lot of dry paint will build up and can sometimes get into the paint that you are airbrushing. And so it's really easy to clean. Just put in some isopropyl in there with the needle removed, and then get in a paper towel and just kind of do some twisting, and you'll clean it out nicely. In preparation for this episode, I actually asked Iwata what the verdict is, like cleaning out an airbrush. Should you put it in an ultrasonic cleaner? What kind of solvent should you use? And they said, officially, they don't recommend anyone use an ultrasonic cleaner on their airbrush. But internally, they do, because they have a set of steps and solutions they use that they know work well. And the guys in the factory need to clean many airbrushes. And so it's a lot easier to do that with a cleaner than by doing it individually. But at home for you guys, I would say to avoid an ultrasonic cleaner unless you have a process that personally works for you, that doesn't result in your Teflon seals eroding away, the nickel plating coming off, and stuff like that. You know, better safe than sorry. If you want to go the extra mile, the last step you do is before putting that needle back in, just give a little bit of that needle lube, and it'll be ready for you next time. Another thing, when you're done using your compressor, you want to make sure to decompress it. You don't want to leave a compressor under compression. There's a pull ring on your compressor. Just give it a tug and fully get all the pressure out until you use it next time. So we just painted all these areas black just so we can get a better viewpoint of how the models look. And now that all that kind of distracting blue is gone, how do you feel about where you ended up?
Very, very happy. Kind of sitting where I was hoping I would be. Like, it's definitely not perfect. It's definitely something that's going to be a skill I'm going to have to grow and learn, because you're never going to just start off, you know, A+ in everything you try. But yeah, definitely something that is a tool that I will work with and use more.
What is your biggest takeaway from today? Like, what was the thing that felt the most impactful to learn? But also, where does it feel like you're still a little bit unsure?
I would say one of the biggest takeaways is just troubleshooting and what kind of quirks it will come up with and how to either work around them or how you're supposed to work with them. Knowing what to look for and what that might mean versus before, when I used to just use the airbrush purely for just priming and would end up, I stopped even doing that because I'd hit so much frustration. It would largely be because it would be something like that would happen and I wouldn't know why. I wouldn't know what was doing it. I wouldn't know why or how to fix it. And so like knowing how to adjust what I'm doing for the medium is something that's probably, I'd say, the biggest takeaway. And then, yeah, just learning how I work, like not being super great yet at knowing where I am aiming with it and where the paint's going to end up.
If you have any questions about airbrushing, leave them down in the comment section below, and I will try to answer them as I am able to. Hope you guys enjoyed the outcome that we have got today. If there's one thing that I can impart on you, is just to remember the relationship between pressure, viscosity, and distance to the model. That triangle of dependencies are literally the most important thing you need to understand from going from you only base coat and prime a model to you use it for something more meaningful, like getting buttery smooth blends like we did in this video. If you like the channel and you want to support it, there are many ways you can do that. All things linked down below. If you like this kind of video where I'm sitting down with a beginner and teaching them something basic like airbrushing or painting a face or layering, for instance, I have other videos in their format that I will link at the end of this one. Subscribe today! And most importantly, don't forget to